The kitchen smelled of coffee and pancakes, a warm, cozy smell that enveloped the house on a cool May morning. It was a little after 7 in the morning in Willow Creek, New York. The Harper house, a two-story, shabby renovation, creaky floors, and a veranda around it, was buzzing with the usual morning bustle. Sunlight streamed through the large bay window, illuminating the specks of dust in the air and covering the old oak table in soft gold. Daniel Harper stood leaning against the countertop, his flannel shirt clinging to the rim of his cracked mug. He looked at his wife, Emily, with a slight smile. Emily was busy at the stove, deftly flipping pancakes. Her brown hair was pulled back into a messy bun, a few strands sticking to her neck from the heat. She was wearing a faded blue t-shirt and sweatpants, her usual morning clothes before she changed into her nurse's uniform for her shift at Willow Creek Hospital. Their daughter, Sophie, sat at the table, her dark hair half braided, her legs dangling and scrolling through something on her phone. "Sophie, are you going to eat this or what?" Emily called over her shoulder as she shifted the pancake onto her plate. There was a playfulness in her voice that always made Daniel feel better. Sophie didn't look up, her fingers tapping rapidly on the screen. "In a minute, Mom. I'm writing to Mia about a science project." Daniel chuckled, crossing his arms. "Science project, huh? Are you planning on blowing up the garage again?" Sophie finally looked at him, rolling her eyes in a way only 12-year-olds can do. "Dad, it was one once, and there was just a little smoke." "God, was it smoking a little?" Emily turned around, holding a spatula, her green eyes sparkling with feigned indignation. "I've been airing out the house for 2 days, Sophie Harper. Your slightly smoke smelled like burnt socks." Daniel laughed, the sound low and warm, and pushed away from the countertop to grab the coffee pot. "She's right, baby. Your lucky grandma didn't take your lab toys away." Sophie groaned, throwing her phone onto the table with a thud. "Grandma Marge loves my experiments. She said that I would be a scientist." "Oh, she adores you, that's for sure," Daniel said, pouring coffee into a mug, steam rising from the dark liquid. "But she still has a fire extinguisher by the back door with your name on it." Emily snorted as she piled the pancakes onto her plate. "Marge believes in you more than we do, Sophie. Now put your phone away and eat before it gets cold." Sophie sighed but obeyed, tucking her phone into her sweatshirt pocket. She reached for the syrup, her braids swaying as she leaned over. "Okay, but only because I'm starving." Daniel sat down at the table opposite Sophie, his mug warming his palms. He watched Emily move quickly but gracefully, as if she had been making pancakes all her life. At 36, she was the most beautiful woman he knew, not just because of her looks, although her smile could stop time, but because of her strength. Calm, confident, as if she could cope with any blow of fate. He thought so back in school, when he was embarrassed to say more than 2 words to her, and he thinks so now, after 13 years of marriage. "You're staring," Emily said without turning around, with a slight mockery in her voice. "I'm not staring at anything," Daniel responded, but his grin gave him away. Sophie made a sound like she was going to be sick. "Ugh, are you serious? Couldn't you wait until I had eaten?" Emily laughed as she brought a plate of pancakes to the table. "Come on, Sophie, you'll experience a little romance." "Romance sucks," Sophie muttered, slicing the pancake with exaggerated force. "Mia says that guys are generally stupid." Daniel raised an eyebrow as he took a sip of his coffee. "Mia speaks her mind, but don't rush to give up on all of us." "Some don't seem so stupid." "That's debatable," Emily said, sitting down next to Sophie with her plate. She nudged her daughter with her shoulder. "Eat, champion. You have a math test today, right?" Sophie's face fell. "Don't remind me. Mr. Peterson's tests are a nightmare. He deliberately catches on all sorts of tricky questions." "You can handle it," Daniel said firmly, but with warmth. "You were preparing, weren't you?" "Well, yes, but—" Sophie hesitated, picking at the pancake. "What if I get confused in the equations? I'm not a math genius." Emily reached up, tucking a stray strand behind Sophie's ear. "You don't have to be a genius, Sophie. Just try your best. And if something doesn't work out, we'll figure it out together, okay?" Sophie nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Fine. But if I fail, it will be Mr. Peterson's fault. Agreed, Daniel said with a wink. I'll write him an angry letter. They ate in comfortable silence, only the forks clinked and the refrigerator hummed quietly. Outside, a cardinal sang in a maple tree in the yard, his red wings flickering outside the window. Daniel looked at Emily, catching her gaze over the rim of his mug. She smiled quietly, just for him, and his heart filled with warmth. This is it, he thought, nothing special, but everything he dreamed of. So, Emily said, breaking the silence, what are your plans for the day, Mr. Harper? Check notebooks or save the world in a firefight? Daniel leaned back in his chair, stretching. Both, probably. I have a lot of essays on the American Revolution, and this afternoon I have duty at the station. I hope it will be calm. Calm is good, Emily nodded, taking a bite of pancake. I have a double shift at the hospital, so I'll be back late. Will you pick Sophie up from soccer? Already in the plan, said Daniel. 4:30, right, Sophie? Yeah, Sophie replied, chewing. She swallowed the bite and added, the coach is making you run laps again. My legs will fall off. Emily laughed. You will survive. This is useful, said the woman who hasn't run since school, Daniel countered, dodging the napkin Emily threw at him. Hey, I run more at work than you, she said, jabbing him with a fork. Running after doctors and carrying equipment that counts. I give up, Daniel said, raising his hands. You're practically an Olympian. Sophie giggled, her anxiety about the test almost gone. Mom, you need to sign up for our team. You will be the oldest football player. Thanks for the compliment, Emily said with a fake pout. I don't like this too old. Ancient, Sophie grinned. Daniel shook his head, hiding his smile behind his mug. Be careful, Sophie. Age discrimination can even land you under house arrest. The conversation flowed easily, as always when they knew each other down to the last detail. Daniel watched Sophie tease Emily, watched Emily retort with that wit he loved so much, and felt a quiet gratitude. He was 38, no longer a boy, but such moments gave him strength to do anything. The clock on the wall struck 8:30, and Emily sighed as she glanced at it. Okay, time to move. Sophie, grab your backpack. I'll finish the braids in the car. Sophie groaned, but slid away from the table, shoving the last piece of pancake into her mouth. Why are we always so early? School is 10 minutes away. Because I have to drop you off and be at the hospital by 8, Emily said, standing up and clearing away her plate. And your dad has his own schedule. Daniel stood up as well, taking Sophie's empty plate and stacking it with his own. I'll do the dishes. You girls are off. Thank you, honey, Emily said, kissing him on the cheek. Her lips were warm, and she smelled like vanilla shampoo. You are gold. Tell that to my students, Daniel said, carrying the plates to the sink. They consider me a tyrant for writing 5-page essays. You are the tyrant, Sophie shouted, throwing her backpack over her shoulder. Mia says your lesson is worse than algebra. Mia has more opinions than the president, Daniel said, turning on the water. Tell her to focus on the thesis and not whine. Emily laughed as she grabbed her keys from the countertop. Let's go, Sophie. Let's leave Dad in charge. Sophie stomped towards the door, her sneakers scuffling across the hardwood floors. Bye, Dad. We didn't sleep in the house with our coffee. No guarantees, Daniel said, grinning as the screen door slammed. He stayed at the sink, washing the dishes, the warm water soothing his hands. Through the window, he saw Emily and Sophie getting into their old Subaru, Emily quickly finishing braiding Sophie's hair as they laughed about something. The car pulled out of the driveway, gravel crunching, and disappeared into the trees. Daniel wiped his hands with a towel. The kitchen was empty without them. He looked around. Sophie's album was open on the tabletop. Emily's badge from the hospital was forgotten by the coffee pot. His own stack of unchecked essays was spilling out of his folder. Not luxury, their life, but their own. He picked up Emily's badge, putting it in his pocket to bring back later, and went upstairs to get ready. The bedroom smelled of Emily's perfume, a light floral scent that lingered in the pillows. The bed was unmade, the blanket was in a bunch, and Daniel smiled. Emily always promised to make it up, but the mornings were too hectic. He straightened the sheets, more out of habit, and caught his reflection in the dresser mirror. Dark hair, slightly gray at the temples, brown eyes, wrinkles when he smiled. Not bad for 38, he thought, although the lines on his forehead betrayed sleepless nights and early rises. He put on a clean flannel and jeans, the standard teacher's uniform, and grabbed his bag from the chair. Downstairs, he locked the front door, the old brass lock stuck as always, and went out onto the veranda. The air was fresh, smelled of wet grass and blooming lilacs. Across the street, Mrs. Larson was watering roses, her gray hair tied in a scarf. "Good morning, Daniel," she shouted, waving her watering can. "Tell Emily her azaleas are gorgeous." "I will, Mrs. Larson," Daniel replied, waving back. "Will you come to the school fair next week?" "I won't miss it for anything," she said, smiling. "Your history club better bring those cookies again." Daniel laughed as he walked toward his truck, a rusty Ford that squeaked as it started. Willow Creek was waking up. Children were pedaling their bicycles, delivery trucks were honking, and the diner on Main Street was bustling with early risers. He drove to Willow Creek School, the radio playing country music. He sang along, thinking about Emily's laugh and Sophie's eye roll. He parked in the teacher's lot and grabbed Emily's bag and badge, deciding to stop by the hospital for lunch. The day promised to be long. 3 lessons, a pile of essays, and duty at the fire department. But as he walked towards the school, its brick building rising under a clear sky, he felt a calm satisfaction. Emily, Sophie, this town is his life, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Inside, the hallways were buzzing with students, lockers slamming, voices merging into a hum. Daniel nodded to a couple of colleagues, his boots clicking loudly on the linoleum. In class, he prepared for the lesson by laying out handouts on the American Revolution and writing the goal of the day on the board. The bell rang and the children burst in, their chatter filling the room. "Okay, let's calm down," Daniel said, leaning on his desk as the class sat down. "Let's talk about Lexington and Concord. Who can say why this is called the shot heard around the world?" Hands reached up and Daniel pointed at the guy behind him, his mind half on class and half on his morning in the kitchen. Emily's laughter, Sophie's teasing, the sunlight illuminating the dust in the air, nothing unusual, but to him it was everything. The rain pattered on the sidewalk, the puddles glistening under the dim light of the street lamps. It was early October 2012, and Willow Creek, New York, was damp. Daniel Harper, 25, who had just finished his first year teaching at a local school, walked to his old pickup truck parked at the grocery store on Main Street. His denim jacket was soaked through, his dark hair stuck to his forehead. In his hands he carried a paper bag with milk, bread, and a jar of peanut butter dinner for one. Benson's was almost empty except for the cashier, Miss Doris, leafing through a magazine behind the counter. Daniel pushed the glass door open, the bell jingled, and cold air hit his face. He was about to run to the car when he noticed a figure against the wall of the store, under a narrow awning. The girl stood pressed against the brick, her shoulders trembling. The rain dripped from the awning, drops falling on her sneakers. She held one plastic bag, clutching it to her chest as if it were all she had left. Daniel stopped, squinting through the rain. Something about her posture, hunched over, almost broken, made him linger. He stepped closer, the bag in his hands getting wet. When the light of the lantern fell on her face, he recognized her. Emily Clark. They studied at the same school. She was 2 years younger. Always bright, with a smile that made guys stutter. But now her face was pale, her eyes were red, her cheeks were wet either from the rain or from tears. "Emily," he called, his voice sounding uncertain, almost drowned out by the sound of the rain. "It's you?" She winced, looking up. Her green eyes were empty, but she quickly wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket. "Daniel?" The voice was hoarse, as if she had been silent for a long time. "What? What are you doing here?" "I was buying groceries," he said, lifting the bag, which was already dripping. "And you?" In this weather, it's better to be at home. Emily looked away, her fingers gripping the bag tighter. Yes, I just went out to get something. Daniel frowned. Her jacket was thin, not suitable for the weather, and her jeans were wet to the knees. She looked cold, and not just because of the rain. He noticed how her hands were shaking, and something else, a roundness under her sweater, barely noticeable, but obvious. She was pregnant. His stomach clenched. He didn't know her well, but rumors flew fast in Willow Creek. They said her boyfriend, Mark Delaney, skipped town a couple of months ago, and her family strict. Church-going is not one of those who forgives this. Are you okay? He asked, stepping under the awning to be closer. The rain ran down his jacket, but he didn't notice. Okay, she said quickly, too quickly. Her voice wavered, and she bit her lip, looking away. It's just a hard day. Daniel put the bag on the asphalt under the awning and put his hands in his pockets. You look like you could use some hot coffee, or at least an umbrella. Emily smiled faintly, but the smile immediately disappeared. I don't have an umbrella, and coffee. I don't drink coffee now. She put her hand on her stomach almost unconsciously and immediately removed it, as if she was afraid that he would notice. He noticed, and I realized that hard day is putting it mildly. He remembered seeing her at school, always with friends, laughing, with that long brown hair that caught the light. Now she stood alone, wet, with dark circles under her eyes, and looked like the world had collapsed. Listen, he said, rubbing the back of his head. My car is over there. Let me give you a ride home. There's no point in standing here in the rain. Emily shook her head, her face tense. Don't, Daniel. I'll get there. It's not far. Not far? He raised an eyebrow. You live on Oak Street, right? It's a 20-minute walk, and you're soaked through. Come on, don't argue. She opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it, her shoulders slumping. Okay, she muttered. Thank you. Daniel picked up his bag, gesturing toward the parking lot. Went. Just don't slip. There are puddles like lakes. They ran across the parking lot, rain lashing their faces. Daniel opened the passenger door of his pickup truck, an old Ford with a shabby interior that smelled of leather and coffee. Emily climbed inside, her bag plopping onto the floor. Daniel got behind the wheel, throwing his bag into the back seat, and started the engine. The wipers creaked, driving water across the windshield. I'll turn on the stove, he said, turning the knob. The warm air rustled, but Emily still shivered. Are you sure you're okay? You look like you're frozen. I'm fine, she said, looking out the window. Her fingers fiddled with the hem of her jacket. I'm just tired. Daniel nodded without insisting. He pulled out onto the main street, headlights catching the wet asphalt. It was quiet in the car, only the rain was pattering on the roof, and the radio was barely audible, playing old rock music. He glanced at Emily. She sat pressed against the door, as if she wanted to become smaller. Her package on the floor was light. He only noticed a packet of pasta and a jar of sauce. Doesn't look like home supplies. So, he said, trying to speak lightly, where are we going? Oak Street, right? Emily was silent for a second, then said quietly, not really. I'm on Maple Road now. Apartment 3B. Daniel frowned. Maple Road was on the outskirts, in an old house where those who could barely make ends meet rented. He knew that Emily's family lived in a large house on Oak Street with a white picket fence and a well-kept lawn. Something was wrong. Maple Road? He asked, trying not to sound surprised. When did you move there? A couple of months ago, she said without looking at him. This is temporary. He nodded, feeling that there was no point in going any further. But the silence in the car became heavier. He remembered the rumors, how her father, a strict pastor, had disowned her when he found out she was pregnant. How Mark, her boyfriend, left without saying a word. Daniel was never close to Emily, but he always noticed her at school. She was someone who attracted attention, but never seemed arrogant. Now she looked lost. Well, Maple Road isn't far, he said, turning into the intersection. You'll be home in 10 minutes. Dry and warm. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. You didn't have to stop. Come on, he said, shrugging his shoulders. I couldn't leave you under that canopy. You would drown. She smiled faintly, but her eyes remained empty. They drove past the diner, its neon sign blinking through the rain. Daniel tried to think of what else to say to break the silence, but words seemed unnecessary. Finally, he stopped at a shabby three-story house on Maple Road. The paint on the walls was peeling, the stairs creaked even from the outside. Here we are, he said, turning off the engine. Do you want me to walk you to the door? It's still raining. No need, she said quickly, grabbing her bag. I can handle it. Thank you, Daniel. Is it true? She had already opened the door, but suddenly stopped, looking at him. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. You hardly know me. Daniel scratched the back of his head, feeling awkward. Don't know. It's just, you looked like you needed someone, and I was nearby. Emily looked at him, her eyes sparkling, but she just nodded. Thank you, she repeated and slipped out of the car, slamming the door. Daniel watched her run towards the entrance, her figure disappearing into the dark corridor. He sat for another minute, the rain pattering on the roof. Something in her gaze haunted him. He started the engine and drove home, but the image of Emily wet, alone, with this light package stuck in his head. A week has passed. Daniel tried not to think about Emily, but every time he passed Benson's he looked back, hoping or fearing to see her again. He knew she worked as a waitress at a diner on Main Street, but he didn't go there. I didn't want her to think that he was interfering in her life. But on Friday night, after a long day at school, he stopped by the store for a beer and saw her again. This time she was inside, at the register, with the same thin package, a can of soup and a packet of crackers. Her face was paler than last time, and her eyes were swollen. Emily, he said, walking up to the cash register where Miss Doris was checking out her purchases. Without an umbrella again? She shuddered, but when she saw him, she smiled faintly. I guess I don't like them. Her voice was tired, but there was an attempt at a joke in it. Miss Doris, an older woman with glasses on a chain, looked at Emily with concern. Baby, you should buy a warmer jacket. It's cold. I'm fine, Miss Doris, Emily said, taking the chance. Thank you. Daniel paid for his beer, and they walked out together. There was no rain, but the air was damp and smelled of fallen leaves. Emily stopped at the entrance, her bag dangling in her hand. Are you on foot again? He asked, nodding at her sneakers, covered in mud. Yes, she said. The car broke down. He knew she was lying. Rumors said that her old Honda was taken away for debts. He nodded without showing that he understood. Let me give you a ride. 3B Maple Road, right. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the bag. Daniel, you don't have to run after me. I can handle it. Nobody's running, he said, opening the pickup door. I just don't want you to trudge around in the dark. Sit down. She sighed, but got into the car. The cabin was warmer than last time, but she still wrapped herself in her jacket. Daniel started the engine, and they drove off in silence. He noticed her looking out the window, her face tense. Do you work at a diner? He asked to break the silence. Yeah, she said, during the day. It's too noisy at night. I understand, he said. I sometimes go there for a burger myself. Do they still make those milkshakes? Emily smiled weakly. Yes, vanilla is the best. She paused, then added, You teach at school, right, Story? Right, he said, turning onto Maple Road. First year. The kids haven't burned down the classroom yet, so I'm coping. She chuckled, almost laughing. You have always been smart. I remember how you won all the quizzes at school. That was 100 years ago, he said, grinning. Now I'm just trying not to drown in notebooks. They drove up to her house. Emily put her hand on the doorknob, but stopped. Daniel, she said quietly, why are you so kind? Most would just walk by. He shrugged, feeling awkward. My mother raised me alone. I saw how hard it was for her. If I can help, why not? Emily looked at him, her eyes sparkling in the light of the street lamp. Thank you, she said and walked out, her steps rustling on the gravel. A few days later, Daniel walked into the diner. He didn't plan it, but his feet carried him there. Emily was behind the counter, wearing a red uniform, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She looked tired, but smiled when she saw him. "I didn't expect you here," she said, placing the menu in front of him. "Burger or cocktail?" "Burger," he said, "and coffee if he's not older than me." She chuckled as she poured the coffee. "Fresh, don't worry." She walked away to give the order, but returned, wiping her hands with a towel. "You're not giving up, are you?" "What?" he asked, pretending that he didn't understand. "Give me a lift, now you've come here," she said, but her tone was more warm than accusing. "Just hungry," he said, smiling, "and you make the best coffee in town." They chatted while she worked. Emily said she was evicted from her parents' house and could barely cover rent. She didn't mention Mark, but her silence said it all. Daniel listened without interrupting, feeling the desire to help grow within him. When her shift ended, he waited at the exit. "Emily," he said as she emerged, changing into her thin jacket, "I have an idea, but you can say I'm crazy." She frowned. "What idea?" He took a deep breath. "Move in with me. I have a spare room. You can save on rent until things get better." Emily stared at him, her eyes widening. "Are you serious?" "Daniel, we barely know each other." "I know," he said, rubbing his neck, "but you shouldn't be alone. This is not charity, just help. If you want, we can make everything official. Temporary marriage so that no one will talk. We'll get a divorce when you get back on your feet." She was silent, her breathing uneven. "You really are crazy," she said finally, but there was a trace of a smile in her voice. "Perhaps," he said, "but I'm serious. Think about it." Emily looked at him, her face softening. "I'll think about it," she said. "Thank you, Daniel." He nodded, feeling like he had done something right, even if it was crazy. She walked off into the darkness, and he stood listening to her footsteps fade away. Tuesday evening in Willow Creek, New York was calm, with a light breeze rustling through the maples. The Harper house on Oak Street smelled of cheese sauce and freshly brewed coffee. It was early May, and the sun had just set, leaving a soft twilight outside the windows. In the kitchen, where the old oak table was littered with textbooks and notebooks, Daniel Harper sat next to his 12-year-old daughter Sophie, helping her with her history homework. His flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled from a long day at school. Emily, his wife, was busy at the stove, stirring macaroni and cheese, Daniel's favorite dish. Her brown hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and there was a sauce stain on her t-shirt that she hadn't yet noticed. Sophie, with a dark braid thrown over her shoulder, frowned over her textbook. Her pencil tapped the page where the section on the Civil War was open. "Dad, this is stupid," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Why should I know who won the Battle of Gettysburg? This was 100 years ago." Daniel, sitting with a mug of coffee, grinned. "Not 100, but about 160. And this is important because Gettysburg changed the course of the war. Do you want me to tell you, or will you figure it out yourself?" Sophie rolled her eyes, but her lips twitched into a smile. "You always say that." "Changed the course of the war. You're like a walking textbook." "Hey, I'm a history teacher," Daniel said, poking her in the shoulder with a pencil. "It's my job to be a walking textbook." "Go ahead, read the question out loud, and I'll help." Emily turned from the stove, holding a wooden spoon. "Don't give him too many clues, Sophie. You're smart yourself." Her green eyes sparkled. Her voice was warm, with a slight mockery. "Aha, smart," Sophie muttered, leafing through her notebook. "Just not in history. Mia says your subject, Dad, is punishment." Daniel laughed, taking a sip of his coffee. "Mia talks too much. Tell her history is cool. Without it, you wouldn't know why things are the way they are." "Well, yes, of course," Sophie said, but still leaned towards the textbook. "Okay, here's the question. What was the significance of the Battle of Gettysburg for the Union? What does this even mean?" Daniel set the mug down, leaning closer. Okay, let's figure it out. The Union was the northern state that fought against the Confederacy. Gettysburg was the moment they proved they could fight back. It gave them, well, sort of confidence. Plus, Lincoln then gave his famous speech. Sophie frowned as she wrote something down. The one about the government of the people and all that? Exactly, Daniel said, nodding. Gettysburg Address. Well done, you already know more than you think. Emily snorted as she poured the pasta into the baking dish. Listen to Dad, Sophie. He knows what he's talking about. Although I still don't understand how you put up with these long lectures, honey. Daniel looked at her, his brown eyes narrowed. Lectures? Is it me? You yourself talk about your shifts at the hospital as if you were filming a series. Because my shifts are drama, Emily said, sprinkling some macaroni cheese. Yesterday, Dr. Kelly lost his glasses again, and I ran around the entire department to find them. Spoiler, they were on his head. Sophie giggled, putting her pencil down. Mom, you should have taken a picture of him. That would be epic. Believe me, I thought about it, Emily said, putting the pan in the oven. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to the table, leaning her elbows on the back of Sophie's chair. But I was too busy saving his reputation. And you, young lady, finish your homework before dinner is ready. I'm trying, Sophie said, but her tone was more joking than irritated. She pointed at the textbook. Dad, here's another question. Why did Lincoln wait so long to free the slaves? Daniel rubbed his chin, where stubble was already appearing. Good question. Lincoln wanted to keep the Union together, and he was afraid that if he immediately declared emancipation, the border states that still had slavery would defect to the Confederacy. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued only in 1863, when the war was already in full swing. Sophie wrote it down, her handwriting neat but quick. Okay, sounds logical, but it's still strange. Like, he could have just said, slavery sucks, it's over. Emily laughed as she went back to the stove to check the oven. If only it were that simple, Sophie. Politics is always difficult. Politics suck, Sophie said, leaning back. I'd rather be a scientist, as Grandma Marge says. Daniel smiled as he looked at his daughter. Grandma Marge is right. You will be a great scientist. But first finish your homework, otherwise she will give you a hard time. The kitchen was filled with a cozy warmth, not only from the oven, but also from their conversation. Outside, the lights of the neighbors' houses flickered in the window, but in the Harper house, the light was soft, yellow, from an old chandelier above the table. Daniel looked at Emily, who was taking plates out of the cabinet. Her movements were familiar, confident. At 36, she still made his heart beat faster, not just because of her beauty, although her smile was like sunshine, but because of the way she held their family together. He caught her eye as she turned, and she winked at him as if she knew what he was thinking. You're staring again, she said, putting the plates on the table. I'm not staring, Daniel said, but his grin gave him away. Sophie let out a loud moan. Ugh, are you serious? It's disgusting. I'm trying to study, and here you are. Flirting. Emily laughed, patting Sophie on the head. Relax, Sophie. We're just glad you're so smart. Really, Daniel? Absolutely, Daniel said, winking at Sophie. But if flirting bothers you that much, we can have a history quiz. How about this? No way, Sophie said, grabbing a pencil. I'd better finish this and eat my mother's pasta. At least they don't ask questions. Emily returned to the stove, pulling out a pan of golden-crusted cheese. The smell filled the kitchen and Daniel felt his mouth water. You've outdone yourself, he said, standing up to help with the serving. It smells like heaven. Wait until you try it, she said, handing him the spoon. I added a little sharp cheddar, just the way you like it. You are a genius, he said, leaning down to kiss her on the cheek. She smiled, nudging him lightly with her shoulder. Sophie rolled her eyes, but her smile showed that she was used to their behavior. You two are insufferable, she said, closing the textbook. I'm done, Dad. Will you check? Daniel took her notebook, skimming the answers. Not bad, Sophie. Only here about the proclamation Add that it did not immediately free all slaves, only in the rebellious states. This is important. Okay, Sophie said, writing down the correction. Can we eat now? You can, Emily said, putting the form on the table. But wash your hands first. And don't argue. Sophie groaned but ran to the sink, her sneakers clicking on the hardwood floors. Daniel and Emily looked at each other, their gazes filled with quiet tenderness. He reached out, squeezing her fingers, and she squeezed back, her skin warm from cooking. Thank you for dinner, he said quietly. You make these evenings special. It's just pasta, she said, but her smile was soft. You make them special too, you know. They could have said more, but Sophie returned, plopping down in her chair. I'm ready. Let's eat before it gets cold. Emily laughed, letting go of Daniel's hand, and began serving the pasta onto plates. They ate, chatting about little things, Sophie's soccer practice, how Daniel almost fell asleep while grading essays about the funny patient in the hospital who demanded only yellow puddings. The conversation was easy, as familiar as breathing. Daniel looked at his family, Sophie eating pasta, Emily laughing at another joke, and felt that everything was in its place. After dinner, Sophie ran upstairs to call Mia, leaving her parents to clear the table. Daniel washed the plates, and Emily dried them standing next to him. Their shoulders touched, and he enjoyed this simple moment. Are you okay? She asked, looking at him. You're kind of quiet today. I'm just tired, he said, smiling. The children at school were like a hurricane today. And you? Double shift tomorrow, right? Yeah, she sighed. But I can handle it. The main thing is that Dr. Kelly doesn't lose his glasses again. He chuckled, handing her the wet plate. If he rubbed, you should have seen that movie Matrix. You know, he still didn't understand what it all meant. Have you ever watched The Matrix? Daniel asked, wiping off the last plate. Emily shook her head, smiling. No, but Sophie was watching. She said it was cool, but I fell asleep within 10 minutes. Typical, he said, hanging up the towel. We'll have to reconsider. Maybe on the weekend. If I don't sleep after my shift, she said, but her tone was light. They finished cleaning and went out onto the veranda to get some fresh air. The sky was strewn with stars, the air smelled of grass and blooming lilacs. Across the street, Mrs. Larson, their neighbor, sat on her porch, leafing through a book by the light of a lantern. Good evening, Harpers, she shouted, waving her hand. It's a beautiful night, isn't it? Exactly, Mrs. Larson, Daniel responded, leaning on the railing. How are your roses? They bloom like a dream, she said. By the way, I saw some guy in the city today. Stranger with tattoos. Not one of ours, that's for sure. Daniel frowned, feeling a slight pang of worry. Is it true? Maybe a tourist. Maybe, Mrs. Larson said with a shrug, but he looked like he was looking for someone. Well, good night. Calm down, Emily said, but her gaze briefly met Daniel's. She didn't say anything, but he noticed how her fingers gripped the railing a little tighter. They returned to the house, locked the doors, and went upstairs. Sophie was already in her room, chatting on the phone with Mia, her laughter coming through the closed door. Daniel and Emily went to bed, their bodies familiarly finding each other in the darkness. He hugged her, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, and felt the tension at Mrs. Larson's words go away. I love you, he whispered. And I you, she answered, her voice sleepy but sincere. He closed his eyes, listening to her breathing, and thought that this life with Emily, Sophie, their home was all he needed. The sun was high above Willow Creek, New York, bathing the main street in bright light. Daniel Harper was driving his old pickup truck, with a paper bag containing his wife's lunch on the passenger seat, Emily a turkey sandwich, her favorite peach yogurt, and a bottle of iced tea. He turned on the radio, which was playing an old Tom Petty song, and hummed to himself, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. The day at school went smoothly. His history lessons were calm, the students didn't cause chaos, and he even managed to grade half of his essays on the American Revolution. Now, on his lunch break, he was heading to Willow Creek Memorial Hospital, where Emily worked as a nurse. She forgot her badge in the morning, and he decided to bring her food at the same time, a small gesture that always made her smile. Daniel loved these moments, seeing her face when she opened the package, hearing her laugh when she teased him for being too caring. He turned into the hospital parking lot, where the asphalt was cracked and several cars parked under the shade of old oak trees. Finding a spot near the entrance, he turned off the engine, grabbed the bag and Emily's badge, stuffing it into his jeans pocket. His flannel shirt was slightly wrinkled, but he didn't think anything of it. No one at the hospital expected him to look smart. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and coffee from the machine. Daniel nodded to the security guard, elderly Bob, who was reading a newspaper behind the counter. "Hey, Bob," Daniel said as he walked by. "Is Emily on the third floor?" "Yeah, in orthopedics," Bob answered, without looking up from the newspaper. "Only she's probably running. There is movement there today." "As always," Daniel said with a smile, heading towards the elevator. The elevator creaked as it rose to the third floor. The doors opened into a long corridor with white walls and bright lamps. Nurses and doctors rushed back and forth, pushing gurneys or flipping through clipboards. Daniel walked past the front desk, where a young nurse was typing something on a computer, and headed toward the staff break room. He knew that Emily often went there during her break for coffee or a snack. The door to the break room was ajar, and he heard voices inside, female voices, with a slight chuckle. Daniel slowed down, not wanting to intrude on someone else's conversation. He recognized the voice of Karen Wilson, the head nurse, whose sharp tone always stood out. The second, softer voice belonged to Lisa Thompson, a young nurse who had been working with Emily for a couple of years. Daniel stopped at the door, lunch bag still in hand, about to knock, but Karen's words made him freeze. "I'm telling you, Lisa, she was with him at the cafe last week," Karen said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Emily and that ex of hers, Mark. They sat there, chatting as if they were old friends." Lisa giggled, the sound nervous but curious. "Seriously, Mark Delaney? I thought he left town a long time ago." "Oh, he's back," Karen said, her tone becoming even more caustic. "And it looks like Emily didn't waste any time." Poor Daniel, always in the shadow of her ex. She, of course, plays the role of an ideal wife, but we know how it happens. Daniel felt his heart clench, as if someone were squeezing it in a fist. He stood motionless, the bag in his hand becoming heavy. Mark Delaney, a name he hadn't heard in years, but which still cut like an old scar. Emily's ex-boyfriend, the one who left her pregnant 13 years ago. Daniel knew that Mark had left Willow Creek shortly after Emily gave birth to Sophie, and there had been little talk of him since then. But now he's back, and Emily met him? Well, maybe it was just by accident, Lisa said, but her voice was hesitant, as if she wanted to play along with Karen. They could just be chatting. Accidentally, Karen snorted. "Please, Lisa." I saw how she smiled at him, so all shining, and Daniel is probably sitting at home, checking his homework, while she flirts with this tattooed tramp. Lisa giggled again, but more quietly. "You're so mean, Karen." Although Emily was always, too good for this town. Maybe she just misses the old days. "She's so bored," Karen said, and Daniel heard her take a sip of something, probably coffee. She always knew how to twirl men. And Daniel, he's a good guy, but honestly, what can he give her? Teacher's salary and voluntary fire service. At least Mark looks like a rock star. Daniel clenched his jaw, his fingers clenching the bag so that the paper rustled. He wanted to barge in, tell Karen to shut up, that she didn't know anything about their lives. But my legs seemed rooted to the floor. His thoughts were spinning. Emily in the cafe with Mark, her smile, their conversation. She didn't mention anything. Not a word. He remembered how she talked casually about her days, about work, about patience. Was she with Mark? And why didn't you tell me? "Okay, enough gossip," Lisa said, but there was more curiosity in her voice than protest. "If Emily finds out that we discussed this, she will kill us." "PFFT, she has no time for that," Karen said. "She's too busy with her little drama. But I'm telling you, Lisa, this is just the beginning. People like her always return to their old habits. Daniel stepped back from the door, his breathing uneven. He turned and walked back down the corridor, the bag still in his hand. He didn't even think about knocking, didn't even think about finding Emily. His mind was filled with Karen's words. Poor Daniel, in the shadow of her ex, flirting with that tramp. He pressed the elevator button, the doors clanged open, and he stepped in, leaning against the wall. The elevator descended and his heart was pounding as if he had run a mile. In the lobby, he walked past Bob without saying a word. The guard looked up, but Daniel was already at the exit, pushing open the glass doors. In the parking lot, the sun was still shining, but now it seemed too bright, hurting the eyes. He climbed into the pickup, throwing the bag on the passenger seat. The sandwich, the yogurt, the iced tea, everything he had so carefully put together for Emily now looked stupid. He gripped the steering wheel, looking up at the hospital building, its brick walls rising like a wall between him and the truth. He tried to remember the last time Emily mentioned something unusual. She talked about work, about Sophie, about how tired she was from working double shifts. Nothing about the cafe, nothing about Mark. But Karen's words sounded in my head like a broken record. I saw her smile at him. Daniel knew Karen, she was the type who liked to delve into other people's lives, but her words touched something in him. An insecurity that was always hidden somewhere deep. He was reliable, stable, but Mark was different. Charismatic, daring, the one who made hearts beat faster. Something Daniel never was. He started the engine, but did not move. His gaze fell on Emily's badge in her shirt pocket. He pulled it out, looking at the photo of her smiling, with warm green eyes. Emily Harper, nurse. His wife. Sophie's mother. The woman he loved more than anything in the world. But now he couldn't help but wonder, what if Karen was right? What if Emily really dated Mark? And why did she hide it? Daniel put his badge back in his pocket and drove out of the parking lot. He headed back to school, but his thoughts were far away. He remembered how Emily came into his life broken, but proud, pregnant with Sophie, rejected by everyone. He proposed marriage to her to protect her, and over time their union became real. But now, for the first time in years, he felt a shadow of doubt. Not about her love, he knew that she loved him, but about whether he knew everything about her. When he parked at the school, his lunch bag was still on the seat. He looked at him. He was twisted. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away, but he couldn't imagine giving it to Emily. Not now. He left the bag in the car and walked into the school, his steps heavier than in the morning. The class was waiting for him. The students were noisy, but his thoughts were in that break room, with Karen and Lisa, and with the name he wanted to forget, Mark. In the evening, at home, Daniel tried to behave as usual. Sophie was doing her homework in the living room. Emily was preparing dinner spaghetti and meatballs. She chatted about work, about a patient who was trying to hide candy under his pillow. Daniel nodded, smiled, but his gaze kept returning to her, looking for something, a hint, a change, anything. She looked like the same Emily, warm, witty, his. But Karen's words still rang in my ears. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, placing the plate in front of him. "You're kind of thoughtful." "I'm just tired," he said, forcing himself to smile. "The kids are exhausted today." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him a little longer than usual. "Okay, but if anything happens, you know where to find me." "I know," he said, squeezing her hand. Her skin was warm, familiar, but his heart still ached. He didn't ask about Mark. I couldn't. But doubt, small and sharp, had already taken root. It was a quiet Wednesday evening at the Harper home on Oak Street, except for the sound of crickets outside the window and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel Harper sat on the living room couch, his dark hair slightly disheveled from a day at school and his flannel shirt undone at the top button. There was a stack of students' essays on the coffee table in front of him, but he couldn't bring himself to check them. His gaze kept returning to the kitchen, where Emily was preparing dinner, humming something under her breath. Their 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, was upstairs, chatting on the phone with her friend Mia. Daniel clutched a bottle of beer in his hand, the cold glass sliding under his fingers. He tried to concentrate on the television, where a replay of the baseball game was playing, but his thoughts returned to the words he had heard in the hospital. Karen Wilson, her sarcastic voice. Emily and that ex of hers, Mark. We sat in a cafe, chatting like old friends. Lisa, her nervous laugh. I saw how she smiled at him. Daniel felt his stomach clench every time he remembered their conversation. He left his lunch bag in the car and couldn't bring himself to give it to Emily. Not after what I heard. Emily walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her brown hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and there was a tomato sauce stain on her t-shirt. She looked tired. The double shift at Willow Creek Memorial Hospital had left her exhausted, but her green eyes still glowed with warmth. She plopped down on the couch next to Daniel, pulling her legs under her. Ugh, she sighed, throwing her head back. The spaghetti is almost ready. I hope Sophie comes down before things get cold. Daniel nodded, his fingers tightening their grip on the bottle. She's probably chatting with Mia. Teenagers, you know. Emily chuckled and smiled. Yes, indeed. Do you remember how we spent hours on the phone at her age? My mom was going crazy. He forced himself to smile, but it came out forced. Yeah, only we didn't have smartphones. We played the disc on an old machine. Right, Emily said, reaching for his beer. Give me a sip. She took a sip, wrinkling her nose. Ugh, how do you drink this? Gorky. It's called taste, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice light. But his thoughts were far away. He looked at her, trying to find something, a hint, a change, anything. She looked like the same Emily, his Emily, but Karen's words haunted her. He cleared his throat, deciding to give it a try. Hey, did you see any of your old friends the other day? Emily raised an eyebrow as she handed the bottle back to him. Old acquaintances? She shrugged, her tone casual, tired. Well, yes, I saw Mark in the cafe. He stopped me while I was getting coffee. But it was an accident, nothing like that. I told him that he is a thing of the past and he should not come back into my life. I have you. She smiled, but the smile was quick, almost automatic, and she immediately turned away, looking at the TV. Why do you ask? Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. Her words, nothing like that, accidentally cut like a knife. He expected. What? Worries? Explanations? Maybe she could tell him more so that he could understand that it really didn't mean anything? But her lightness, her tired indifference touched him. She didn't even look at him when talking about Mark. He swallowed, trying to keep his voice level. Just like that, he said, shrugging his shoulders. We have a small town. People are chatting. Emily chuckled, not looking up from the screen where the baseball player was hitting the ball. Yeah, Willow Creek is the gossip capital. Do you remember how Mrs. Larson decided that we got a dog because Sophie was playing with the neighbor? She fell silent, turning to him. You're not worried about this, are you? About Mark? Daniel froze, his fingers clenching around the bottle. No, he lied, too quickly. Just curious. I haven't heard from him for a long time. Emily looked at him, her gaze becoming a little more attentive. Well, he's back in town, it seems. I don't know for how long, but I don't care. She stretched, getting up from the sofa. I'll go check the spaghetti. Sophie, she shouted towards the stairs. Dinner is ready. Come down. Daniel nodded, but his mind was spinning. She said that Mark was the past, that she had him. But her carelessness, her reluctance to talk in more detail, it did not reassure me. He remembered Mark tall, tattooed, with that cocky grin that the girls at school liked. He was the exact opposite of Daniel. Not a teacher, not a volunteer firefighter, but a guy who lived by his own rules. Daniel knew that Emily had chosen him, that she loved him, but now he couldn't help thinking, what if she missed what she had? What if Mark reminded her of the life she didn't have? Sophie stomped downstairs, her sneakers clicking on the stairs. She plopped down at the kitchen table, her dark braid dangling. Finally, food, she announced, grabbing a fork. I'm starving. Emily laughed as she set the bowl of spaghetti down on the table. You always die of hunger, Sophie. Eat before it gets cold. Daniel joined them, but his appetite had disappeared. He picked at his food, listening to Sophie talk about soccer practice, how the coach made them run an extra lap and Mia almost fell into the mud. Emily laughed, teasing Sophie, but Daniel was barely following the conversation. He looked at Emily, her smile, her warm eyes, the way she patted Sophie on the head. She was his wife, the mother of his daughter, the woman he loved most. But now he couldn't help but wonder, what was she hiding? After dinner, Sophie ran upstairs, muttering something about calling Mia. Daniel helped Emily clear the table, but his movements were mechanical. He washed the dishes, she dried them, their shoulders touching, as always. But today it brought no consolation. He wanted to ask more, wanted her to tell everything where she was, what she talked about with Mark, why she didn't mention it earlier. But the words got stuck in my throat. What if he asks and she gets angry? Or worse, will he say something he doesn't want to hear? Are you sure you're okay? Emily asked, putting the last plate in the cupboard. Her voice was soft, but there was a slight worry in it. You've been kind of, I don't know, distant all evening. Daniel dried his hands with a towel, forcing himself to smile. Just tired, Em. It was a long day, and these essays will not check themselves. She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him. Okay, but if something is wrong, you will tell, right? Of course, he said, but his voice sounded false even to himself. Everything is fine. Emily leaned over, kissing his cheek. Fine. I'll go take a shower. Don't stay too long with these essays. I won't, he promised, but when she left, he didn't move. He stood in the kitchen, listening to the water turn on upstairs and Sophie laughing in her room. Everything was the same as always, but something has changed. Karen's words, Emily's carelessness, Mark's name, they all mixed in his head like poison. He didn't want to believe the gossip and didn't want to doubt her. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already beginning to grow. He sat down at the table and opened the folder with his essays, but the letters blurred before his eyes. He thought about Mark, about how he might look now, still with that same grin, still with that same charisma. He thought about the cafe, about how Emily smiled at him, how they chatted. She said it was an accident, that Mark was the past. But if this is true, why didn't she tell right away? Why did he find out about this from Karen? Daniel closed the folder, his hands shaking. He didn't know what to do. Should I ask her again, insist, or remain silent, hoping that it's all nonsense? He loved Emily and trusted her, but now trust seems fragile, like glass. He stood up, turned off the light in the kitchen, and went upstairs, his steps heavy. In the bedroom, Emily was already in bed, her hair still damp from the shower, flipping through a magazine. She smiled at him, and for a second everything was as before. Come here, she said, patting the bed. Forget about work for 5 minutes. He lay down next to her, hugging her, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He wanted to believe her. He wanted everything to be simple. Emily stood at the stove, stirring the soup. Her brown hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her jeans had a spilled coffee stain on them. She looked tired. Another double shift at Willow Creek Memorial Hospital had left her exhausted, but she still tried to keep their evening light. Their 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, sat on the living room couch, scrolling through something on her phone, her dark braid dangling as she pumped her leg. Sophie, put your phone away, Emily called over her shoulder. Dinner in 5 minutes. Go wash your hands. Sophie moaned without looking up from the screen. Mom, I'll just finish reading. Mia sent me a meme. It's urgent. Urgently? Emily snorted, her voice warm, but with a hint of irritation. The only thing that's urgent is that you don't sit at the table with dirty hands. Come on, get moving. Daniel would usually have thrown in a joke, teased Sophie or Emily, but today he remained silent. He turned the page of the essay without delving into the text. His gaze slid to Emily, to the way she moved habitually, confidently, as if nothing had changed. But for him everything was different. Ever since he asked her about Mark, her casual answer, "It was an accident, nothing like that," had haunted him. She said that Mark was the past, that she had him, but her lightness, her reluctance to talk in more detail cut deeper than he expected. He wanted to believe her, but every day his doubts grew, fueled by silence. Emily turned around, noticing his silence. Daniel, are you going to eat, or are you going to stare at these notebooks all evening? Her tone was playful, but there was a hint of anxiety in it. He looked up, forcing himself to smile. I eat, just a lot of work. A lot of work, she repeated, raising an eyebrow. You've been saying that for a week now. Maybe you need a day off. We could go to the lake on Saturday. Sophie, how are you? Sophie peeked out of the living room, her phone still in her hand. Lake, cool, but only if Dad doesn't force me to fish. It's boring. Daniel would usually fake it out, say something like, boring, you just don't know how to hold a fishing rod. But instead, he just nodded. We'll see, he said, his voice flat, almost empty. Emily frowned, but didn't insist. She turned to the stove, muttering, okay, whatever you say. Sophie, finally putting her phone away, plopped down at the table. Dad, why are you so gloomy? Someone in class hassled you again. Nobody got me, Daniel said, closing the folder with his essays. I'm just tired, Sophie. Happens. Well, you're just like a zombie, she said, rolling her eyes. Mom, tell him to have fun. Emily brought a bowl of soup, placing it on the table. I'm trying, Sophie, but your dad seems determined to be Mr. Serious. She looked at Daniel, her smile was warm, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. Really, Daniel, are you okay? You're hardly kidding. He clenched his jaw, feeling her words tug at something inside him. He wanted to be the same, to laugh, to tease her, to keep everything light. But every time he looked at her, he saw the cafe, Mark, her smile that Karen had talked about. He shrugged, taking the spoon. It's okay, Em. Just a lot of things to do. Emily nodded, but her gaze lingered on him. She sat down, serving the soup into bowls, and the evening continued, but tension hung in the air like smoke. Sophie was chatting about school and how Mia accidentally spilled juice on the new teacher, but Daniel was barely listening. He picked at the soup, his thoughts swirling around one thing. Why didn't Emily tell Mark right away? What is she hiding? After dinner, Sophie ran upstairs, muttering something about her homework. Emily began clearing the table and Daniel stood up to help, but his movements were slow, as if he were carrying something heavy. They worked in silence, only the dishes clanking as he washed them. Emily wiped, standing next to her, but their usual lightness was gone. You forgot to pay the electricity bill, she said suddenly. Her voice was even, but with a slight reproach. A reminder arrived today. I covered it, but you promised to take care of it. Daniel froze, the sponge in his hand stopping. Damn, sorry, he said, looking into the sink. It slipped my mind. Emily sighed as she hung up her towel. Everything is fine, but you've been kind of absent-minded lately. I can't do this alone, Daniel. Her words stung him, and he felt irritation boiling inside. I said I'm sorry, Em. I also have a lot to do. You're not the only one carrying everything on yourself. She turned to him, her eyebrows raised. That's not what I meant. It's just, you promised, and I was counting on it. We're a team, right? Yes, team, he said, but his voice was harsher than he intended. He threw the sponge into the sink, water splashing over the edge. I'll sort out the accounts tomorrow. Okay. Emily looked at him, her lips pursed. Okay, she said quietly, but there was tension in her tone. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, her steps fast, almost angry. Daniel stood at the sink, his hands still wet. He knew that he had gone too far, that the bill was a trifle, but her words, I can't handle everything alone, hurt him. He felt guilty, but at the same time angry. Angry at her for not seeing him struggle. Angry at himself for not being able to just ask about Mark. Angry at Karen for her poisonous words that were now poisoning everything. The next few days were no better. Daniel tried to remain the same, but his jokes sounded forced, and his conversations with Emily became shorter. He avoided long glances, afraid that she would see his doubts. Emily, busy with work and Sophie, noticed his detachment, but chalked it up to fatigue. She tried to diffuse the situation. She made him his favorite apple pie, suggested watching a movie, but he answered in monosyllables, and her smile became more and more strained. On Friday night, they argued again, this time over Sophie's schedule. Emily stood in the living room, holding a calendar, her voice annoyed. Daniel, you said you'd pick Sophie up from soccer at 4, and I was sitting in the hospital trying to figure out where she was because you didn't answer the phone, she said, her hands on her hips. I was late for my appointment with Dr. Kelly because of this. Daniel, sitting on the couch with a beer, clutched the bottle. I was at the station, M. We had a challenge. I couldn't pick up the phone, and I picked her up at 4:30. She was fine. I'm fine, but I was worried, Emily said, her voice getting louder. You could have at least written. I'm not a mind reader, Daniel, and I can't be everywhere at once, he snapped, his patience running out. I have a job too, you know, not only you. Emily stared at him, her eyes shining with resentment. I'm not saying you don't have a job, but we have to work together, and you're floating around somewhere. What's going on with you? He opened his mouth to answer, but the words stuck. What could he say? What gossip did you hear? That he's afraid that she was seeing Mark behind his back? He clenched his jaw and turned away. Nothing, he muttered. Just forget it. Emily shook her head, her shoulders slumping. Okay, she said quietly and went upstairs, leaving him alone. On Saturday morning, Sophie sat at the kitchen table, chewing toast and scrolling through her phone. Emily was making coffee, her movements were sharp, as if she was still angry. Daniel walked in, his face was frowning, but he tried to smile. Good morning, Sophie, he said, pouring himself some coffee. What do you have there? Memes, Sophie said without looking up. Mia sent a video of a cat falling off the sofa. Do you want to watch? Maybe later, he said, sitting down at the table. His voice was softer than the day before, but the tension was still palpable. Emily set the mug down on the table, her gaze flickering over him. Are you at the station today? She asked, her tone neutral. Yes, after lunch, he said. And you? Shift until 6, she answered, turning to the sink. Sophie, are you at Mia's today? Yeah, Sophie said, but her gaze moved from the phone to her parents. She frowned, her voice becoming quieter. Mom, is Daddy angry with you? Emily froze, her hand stopping on the sponge. She turned, forcing herself to smile. No, Sophie, Dad is not angry. We're just busy, grown-up stuff, you know. Sophie looked at Daniel, her eyes serious. Are you sure you're not angry, Dad? Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He hated that Sophie noticed. No, baby, he said, trying to sound convincing. Everything is fine. Eat your toast. Sophie nodded, but her gaze was incredulous. She returned to the phone, but her shoulders were tense. Emily looked at Daniel, her lips pursed, but she didn't say anything. She turned away, starting to wash the dishes. Her movements were sharp. Daniel finished his coffee, his stomach churning. He knew Sophie sensed their discord, and it was killing him. He wanted to fix everything. He wanted to be the same, but every time he looked at Emily, he saw Mark. Karen's gossip, her mockery, her words about how Emily smiled at him were like poison, slowly poisoning everything he loved. He didn't know how to ask, didn't know if he wanted to know the truth. But the silence between them grew, and he was afraid that it would become insurmountable. Emily finished the dishes and left the kitchen without saying a word. Daniel remained at the table, looking at his empty mug. Sophie looked up, her voice quiet. Dad, you and Mom are not getting a divorce, right? Daniel winced, his heart sank. No, Sophie, he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil inside. Mom and I love each other. Sometimes adults just get tired, but we can handle it. Sophie nodded, but her eyes were full of doubt. She stood up, taking the toast upstairs, and Daniel was left alone. The radio was playing an old country track, but Daniel was barely listening. His thoughts were occupied with the same thing that had been tormenting him for 2 weeks. Karen Wilson's words about Emily seeing Mark, her ex, and Emily's casual answer, which only strengthened his doubts. Marge's house was small, one-story, with faded blue paint and a neat garden filled with roses and daisies. There was an old swing in the yard that Daniel used to swing on as a child. He parked at the curb, turned off the engine, and grabbed a box of donuts, his boots crunching on the gravel. His flannel shirt was clean but wrinkled, and there were shadows under his eyes from sleepless nights. He hoped that a visit to his mother would distract him, but he knew that Marge was not one to miss his scowl. The door opened before he even knocked. Marge Harper, a short woman with short gray hair and sharp brown eyes, stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face, covered with wrinkles, was stern but warm, as always when she saw her son. "Well, finally," she said. Her voice was low, with a slight hoarseness. "I thought you forgot the way home. What do you have?" Daniel picked up the box, trying to smile. "Donuts. Maple, just the way you like it." "That's why you're my favorite son," Marge said, stepping back to let him pass. "Come in, don't stand on the threshold." Daniel walked in, inhaling the familiar smell of home, a mixture of lavender soap, freshly brewed coffee, and old wood. The living room was cozy, with a worn sofa piled with crocheted blankets and shelves filled with books and photographs. One of them shows Daniel in his school uniform. The other shows him with Emily and Sophie on a picnic a couple of years ago. He looked away, feeling something tighten in his chest. "Coffee?" Marge asked, already heading towards the kitchen. "I just brewed it." "Yeah, thanks," Daniel said, setting the box down on the kitchen table. The kitchen was small, with faded yellow wallpaper and an old refrigerator that hummed like a tractor. He sat down at the table, his fingers nervously tapping the wooden surface. Marge poured coffee into two mugs, one with the words "Best Mom" on it, the other with the logo of the local fire station. She placed them on the table, adding a plate for donuts, and sat down opposite her, her eyes carefully studying her son. "Well," she said, taking a bite of the donut, "what's eating, son? You look like you've lost a friend." Daniel clutched the mug, its warmth burning his palms. "Nothing, Ma. Just tired. School, fire, you know how it is." Marge snorted, her gaze sharpening. "Don't lie to me, Daniel James Harper. I've known you for 38 years. You're not just tired. You have a face like a man who carries the whole world on his shoulders. Spit it out." He looked away, looking out the window where the lilac branches swayed. Marge has always been like this, straightforward, not tolerating omissions. She raised him alone, working 2 jobs, and taught him to be honest, but now honesty was scary. He didn't want to voice his doubts, didn't want them to become more real. But under her gaze, he felt like a child again, unable to hide the truth. "It's about Emily," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I heard something. In the hospital." Marge raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of her coffee. "Heard? What is this something?" Daniel swallowed, his fingers gripping the mug tighter. "Karen Wilson, one of the nurses, said that Emily saw Mark. Well, her ex, in a cafe last week. They chatted, smiled. It's as if nothing has changed." Marge put the mug down, her face becoming more serious. "Karen Wilson, that gossipy girl who won't stop talking. And you believed her chatter?" "Not really," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his head. "But I asked Emily, and she confirmed. She said that she met him by chance, and that it didn't mean anything. But she was so careless, Ma, as if this is nonsense. And I don't know what to think." Marge leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "What exactly did she say?" Daniel sighed, repeating the words that were running through his head. That he stopped her in a cafe when she was getting coffee. That she told him that he was the past and that she had me. But she didn't even look at me when she spoke. I just shrugged it off, as if it doesn't matter. "And this is important to you," Marge said, her voice calm but firm. "And now you sit and wonder whether she's lying or not." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "I don't want to think that she's lying. I love her, Ma. She, she's everything to me. But Mark, he was her first, you know. And he's not like me. He is bright and daring. And I'm just a teacher. What if she—" He paused, unable to finish. Marge leaned back in her chair, her face softening but her eyes remaining sharp. Daniel, listen to me. I've known Emily for 13 years. I saw the way she looked at you when you got married, the way she held Sophie, the way she built your life. This woman loves you. I'm sure she wouldn't cheat. But you let Karen Wilson's gossip get into your head. Then why didn't she tell me right away? Daniel asked, his voice getting louder. Why did I learn about this from Karen? And why did she talk about it so easily, as if it was nothing? Marge took another donut, took a bite, and thought about it. Maybe because it's really nothing for her. Maybe she didn't want to worry you, knowing how you might take it. Or maybe she's just tired, son. She works like a horse and raises Sophie. Sometimes people don't think about how their words sound. Daniel shook his head, his fingers fiddling with the hem of his shirt. I know it works. I know she's trying. But I can't stop thinking about it. What if she... What if she misses him? By what she was like before? Marge sighed, her voice becoming softer. Daniel, I raised you alone. I know what it's like to doubt yourself, to fear that you're not good enough. But you are not just a teacher. You are the man who gave Emily a home when her world fell apart. You raised Sophie, you hold this family together. And Emily chose you. Not Mark, not anyone else. You. He looked at her, his eyes sparkling. Then why do I feel like it's not enough? Marge reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Her palm was warm, calloused from years of work. Because you are a man, son, and people are afraid. But fear is a bad advisor. If you want to know the truth, talk to Emily. Directly, without hints. Don't let gossip destroy what you've built. You've been through too much to let some Karen Wilson ruin it. Daniel squeezed her hand, his throat tight. What if she says something I don't want to hear? Then you'll figure it out, Marge said, her voice as hard as steel. But I'm telling you, Emily is not the one who runs after the past. She loves you, Daniel, and Sophie, and your home. Don't forget this. He nodded, but his heart was still pounding. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe Emily, but the fear was stronger. He saw Mark in his head, his grin, his tattoos, his lightness that always contrasted with his own reliability. He was afraid that Emily, despite everything, could remember that life, that freedom that he could never give her. Marge let go of his hand, taking another donut. Now eat, she said, pushing the box. Don't make me throw away these goodies. Daniel smiled weakly as he took the donut. You always know how to bribe me. That's because I'm your mother, she said with a wink. And I'm always right. Remember this. They sat for another hour, chatting about little things about her garden, about how Sophie wanted to sign up for a science club, about the fire station where Daniel was on duty. But Marge's words about talking to Emily stuck in his head. He knew she was right. He knew he should ask. But every time he imagined this conversation, he was overcome with fear. What if the truth breaks everything? When he left, Marge hugged him. Her hug was tight, like when she was a child. Be honest with her, Daniel, she said quietly, and with yourself. You will survive this. He nodded, his throat tight. Thank you, Ma. He got into the pickup truck, a box of leftover donuts laying on the seat. The engine began to purr, and he drove home, but Marge's words wouldn't let go. Talk to Emily. Don't let gossip destroy what you've built. He wanted to follow her advice, he wanted to trust, but fear was like a shadow following him. He loved Emily, but now every look, every word seemed like a test, and he didn't know if he was ready for answers. At home, Emily was in the kitchen preparing lunch for Sophie. She smiled when she saw him, but her smile was cautious. How's Marge? She asked, chopping carrots. Okay, Daniel said, placing the box on the table. I brought you a donut. You are an angel, she said, but her gaze lingered on him. Are you? Okay? Yes, he lied, his voice flat. I was just thinking. Emily nodded, but her eyes were full of questions. Emily Harper stood in the kitchen, her hands moving quickly but carefully as she chopped tomatoes for a salad. A frying pan of chicken was sizzling on the stove, the aroma of garlic and rosemary filling the air. She put on her favorite dress, dark green, flowing, with a neckline that always made Daniel smile. Her brown hair was down, slightly wavy from her shower, and her lips were wearing lipstick that she rarely wore. Today, Emily wanted to do everything right. She felt how Daniel's coldness, his distance over the past weeks, was eating away at their closeness and decided to arrange a romantic evening to bring back their old spark. Sophie, their 12-year-old daughter, was staying with her friend Mia for the night, giving Emily and Daniel a rare chance to be alone. Emily placed 2 candles, not yet lit, on the table and a bottle of red wine they had bought for their anniversary. She wanted the evening to be special, not just a dinner, but a moment where they could talk, laugh, be themselves. She was tired of his short answers, of his vacant gaze, of the petty quarrels that broke out over bills or Sophie's schedule. She chalked up his behavior to stress school, the firehouse, endless essays he'd be grading until midnight, but deep inside she was gnawed by anxiety. Something was wrong, and she hoped that this evening would help her understand what. Emily looked at her watch. 6 in the evening. Daniel promised to be home by 6:30 after school and a short shift at the fire station. She wiped her hands on her apron, took it off, and hung it on the hook. She straightened her dress in the hallway mirror, smiling at her reflection. She still looked good, despite being tired from working at the hospital. Her green eyes sparkled, and she hoped Daniel would notice how hard she was trying. "Come on, Harper," she muttered to herself as she walked back into the kitchen. "Make this evening magical." She lit the candles, their flames reflecting in the glass goblets, and turned on some soft music, old jazz, which Daniel loved. She checked the chicken, poured sauce over it, and placed the salad on the table. Everything was ready. She poured herself half a glass of wine, took a sip, and felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Now all that was left was to wait. Daniel parked his pickup truck in the driveway at 6:25. His dark hair was tousled, and there were shadows under his eyes. It had been a long day at school, the students were noisy, and one of his essays had been copied, which left him exhausted. It was quiet at the fire station, but his thoughts still revolved around the same things. Karen Wilson's words about Mark, Emily's casual answer, her smile that he didn't see but imagined all too clearly. Even his mother, Marge's advice to talk to Emily did not help. The fear of what he might hear was stronger than the desire to know the truth. He entered the house, throwing the keys on the table in the hallway. The smell of food, garlic, herbs, something warm and homey hit his nose, and he frowned. Usually on Fridays, they would order pizza or eat leftovers. He walked into the kitchen and froze. Emily stood at the table, wearing the green dress he had always loved, her hair falling softly over her shoulders. The candles were burning, the wine was sparkling in the glasses, jazz was flowing from an old speaker. She looked amazing. But instead of feeling warmth, he felt a pang of guilt. She tried, but he was consumed by his doubts. "Wow," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "What is this? Some kind of holiday?" Emily smiled, but her smile was cautious. "Not really. I just thought we could use an evening together. Sophie is at Mia's, so." She shrugged, her fingers fiddling with the rim of her glass. "Sit down, I'm almost finished." Daniel nodded, but his gaze slid over the table, candles, wine, her dress. It was all for him, but he could not get rid of the heaviness in his chest. He sat down, his boots clicking on the parquet floor. "Smells great," he said, trying to sound sincere. You did great, Em." "I'm trying," she said, carrying the frying pan with chicken to the table. She placed it on the stand, her movements were smooth, but he noticed how her fingers trembled slightly. "Pour the wine, and I'll bring the salad." He took the bottle, pouring wine into her glass, then into his. His hands weren't as steady as usual. He looked at her smile, at the way the candlelight played on her face, and he felt worse. She did all this for them, and he thought about Mark, about the cafe, about what she could be hiding. He took a sip of the wine. The taste was tart, but not soothing. Emily returned with the salad, sat down opposite her, and raised her glass. "For us," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "For us to always find time for each other." Daniel clinked glasses with her, but his "for us" sounded quieter. He looked into her eyes, so familiar, so beloved, But now there was something else in them anxiety that she tried to hide. He wanted to say something, ask about Mark, but instead he remained silent, picking at his food. They ate, but the conversation did not go well. Emily tried to revive him by talking about a funny patient in the hospital who demanded that he be served only green tea. "I'm serious," he was checking the color, as if I could slip him black, she said, laughing. I almost poured tea on his head. Daniel smiled, but it was a forced smile. "Sounds like an adventure," he said, looking at his plate. Emily fell silent, her spoon still. "Daniel," she finally said, her voice becoming more serious. "What's happening? You've been silent all evening. Is this because of me?" He looked up, his heart pounding. "No, Em," he lied too quickly. "Just, my head is full. Work, you know." "Work," she repeated, her eyes narrowing. "You've been saying that for weeks. If that's not working, then what is? You barely look at me." Her words hurt him, and he felt irritation boiling inside him, not at her, but at himself, at his doubts, at all of this. He clenched his jaw, trying to keep his voice level. "I'm looking at you, Em. I'm here. I just can't always be in the mood." Emily put the glass down, her fingers squeezing the stem. "I'm not asking you to be in the mood. I ask you to be with me. You're somewhere, Daniel. I do all this." She nodded towards the table, "so that we can be closer. But it's like you don't want to." He felt a stab of guilt, sharp as a knife. She was right, she tried, but he didn't. But every time he looked at her, he saw Mark, his grin, their conversation in the cafe. He wanted to tell her, wanted to ask, but fear stopped him. Instead he said, "Sorry, Em, I appreciate it. Is it true? It's just, I have a meeting at the firehouse today. I won't make it in time." Emily froze, her face turning pale. "Meeting?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was pain in it. "You didn't talk about any meeting." "It was just announced," he said, looking away. It was a lie, and he knew she felt it. "Nothing serious, just need to be there." Emily looked at him, her eyes sparkling, but she pressed her lips together, not letting the tears escape. "Okay," she said, standing up. "Go. I'll clean it up." He began, but she had already turned around, starting to collect the plates. Her movements were sharp, almost angry. She took the candles, blew them out, and thin streams of smoke rose into the air. She put them away in the closet, her back tense. Daniel stood up, his arms hanging at his sides. "I'll be back quickly," he said, but his voice sounded empty. "We can finish later." "Of course," she said without turning around. "Go." He grabbed the keys and walked out, the door slamming behind him louder than he intended. He sat in the pickup for a minute, looking at the house. The kitchen light was still on, and he could see Emily's silhouette moving by the sink. He felt like a scoundrel. She did all this for them, and he ran away because he couldn't cope with his own thoughts. But he did not go to the station, there was no meeting. Instead, he just drove around the city until the streets were empty, trying to drown out the voice in his head that kept saying, "What if she's still thinking about Mark?" Emily remained in the kitchen, washing the dishes with such force that the plates almost cracked. Her dress now seemed stupid, her lipstick unnecessary. She felt humiliated and rejected. She tried, wanting to return their closeness, but Daniel didn't even try. His excuse about the meeting was such an obvious lie that she wanted to scream. She didn't understand what was happening. He was cold, distant, and every time she tried to come closer, he pulled away even more. She wiped her hands, her eyes burning with tears she didn't want to let go. She knew he wasn't at the fire station. He just didn't want to be with her, and it scared her more than she could admit. She remembered their quarrels about the score, about Sophie's schedule, but these were trifles. Something more stood between them, and she didn't know what. Emily sat down at the table, looking at the unfinished wine. She wanted to call him, demand an explanation, but instead she just sat there, her fingers clutching her glass. She loved Daniel, loved their life, their family, but now she felt like something was collapsing, and she didn't know how to stop it. When she went to bed, The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock. Daniel returned late, his steps careful not to wake her. She lay there pretending to be asleep, but her heart ached. The gap between them grew, and she was afraid that she would no longer be able to cross it. Daniel Harper stood at the window, his hands clutching an old photograph he found in a drawer, Emily and Mark laughing, taken over 13 years ago. His dark hair was disheveled, his flannel shirt was unbuttoned, and his eyes were blazing with a mixture of pain and anger. The last few weeks, the rumors, the innuendo, his own doubts had pushed him to the breaking point. He couldn't remain silent any longer. Emily entered the living room, her bare feet walking quietly on the parquet floor. She was wearing pajamas, an old t-shirt and shorts, and her brown hair hung over her shoulders. She had just put Sophie to bed, their 12-year-old daughter, who knew nothing of the storm brewing between her parents. Emily stopped when she noticed Daniel at the window, his tense posture, the photograph in his hand. Her heart sank. "Daniel?" she called, her voice soft but wary. "Why are you not sleeping? It's almost midnight." He turned, his face hard, but his eyes sparkling. He picked up the photograph, his fingers trembling. "This," he said, his voice low, almost hoarse. "You kept it." "Why?" Emily frowned, stepping closer to look at the photo. Her eyes widened when she recognized it, an old photograph Sophie had found in a box for her school family history project. It's, it's just a photo, Daniel," she said, her voice confused. "Sophie took it for school. I didn't even know it was there." "I didn't know?" His voice became louder, with a harsh edge. "Are you saying that it just ended up in the box, with him?" He pointed a finger at Mark in the photo, his jaw clenching. Emily froze, her green eyes filled with confusion. "Daniel, what are you talking about? This is an old photo. It doesn't mean anything. Why are you so angry?" He stepped towards her, the photo still in his hand, his breathing uneven. "You still love him, right?" His voice broke, the words came out like a blow. "Brand, I was just a backup option, right? The one who picked you up when he ran away?" Emily gasped, her face turning pale. Her eyes instantly filled with tears, but she clenched her fists, her voice shaking with shock and anger. "What? Daniel, are you serious? Do you really think that I love Mark, after everything we've been through? Then why were you dating him?" he blurted out, his voice filled with pain. "I heard, Emily, in the hospital. Karen and Lisa said that you were with him at the cafe." She smiled at him. She chatted as if nothing had changed. "And you didn't tell me anything." Emily stared at him, her tears running down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "Karen and Lisa," she repeated, her voice getting louder. "Did you believe Karen Wilson's gossip? A woman who lives to wag her tongue? Daniel, I told you about Mark. I said that I met him by chance, that I told him that he was the past. How can you, how can you think that I cheated on you? Because you didn't tell right away," he shouted, his voice echoing in the living room. He threw the photograph onto the table, and it skimmed across the surface. "I found out from Karen, Emily, from Karen. And when I asked, you shrugged it off as if it was nonsense. If it doesn't mean anything, why did you hide it?" "I didn't hide it," she shouted back, her voice shaking with anger and pain. "It was 5 minutes, Daniel. 5 minutes in a cafe where he approached me and I told him to leave. I didn't think it was worth talking about because it didn't mean anything. You are my life, you and Sophie. How can you think that would I want Mark?" Was Emily really hiding her feelings for Mark? Or maybe the rumors are just an attempt to ruin her happiness with Daniel. Like, if you want to know the whole truth, and subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of this confusing story. Daniel clenched his fists, his chest heaving. "Because he was your first, Emily. He was the one you loved, and I was the one who helped when he left you. I always knew that I was not like him. Not bright, not the one who makes the heart beat faster. And now he was back, and you were smiling at him." Emily stepped towards him, her tears flowing freely, but her voice was firm. "Do you really think I'm like that? Why did I stay with you out of gratitude? Daniel, I chose you. Not because you saved me, but because I love you. I love your kindness, your strength, the way you make me laugh. Mark is a mistake I made 100 years ago. He means nothing to me. Then why can't I believe it? His voice broke, and he turned away, his hands shaking. I want to believe you, Em, but I see you smile. I hear Karen say that you shone with him. And I'm afraid that I was never enough for you. Emily sobbed, her arms falling to her sides. Enough? Daniel, you are everything to me. You gave me the home, the family, the life I dreamed of. How can you think that you are not enough? She stepped closer. Her voice became quieter, pleading. Tell me what's going on. Why don't you believe me? What have I done? He turned to her, his eyes full of pain. I heard them, Emily. In the restroom. Karen said you were flirting with him, that you were always too good for me. And Lisa, she laughed as if it were true. And then you said it was an accident, but you didn't even look at me. It's like you didn't care. Emily shook her head, her face wet with tears. Karen is a liar, Daniel. She hates me because I don't play into her gossip. She made it up to sting me, and you. You believed her, not me. Her voice trembled, and she pressed her hand to her chest. Do you think I'm capable of betraying you, after everything you've done for me? After you became Sophie's father, when did Mark run away? Daniel clenched his jaw, his throat burning. I don't know what to believe, Emily. I want to trust you, but I see him in my head. His grin, his tattoos, and I think maybe you miss the way you were with him. For the life that I cannot give you. Emily sobbed, her voice almost a whisper. I don't miss that life. That life was chaos, Daniel. You gave me stability, love, and family. Do you think I want to go back to Mark? To the man who left me pregnant? Do you really think I'm like that? He looked at her, his heart breaking. Her tears, her pain were real, but the doubts still burned. Then why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why did I have to find out from Karen? Because I didn't think it was important, she shouted, her voice breaking. It was 5 minutes, Daniel. 5 minutes that meant nothing. I didn't want to worry you because I knew how you might take it. But I didn't think that you would believe the gossip instead of me. They stood looking at each other, their breathing heavy in the silence of the living room. The floor lamp blinked, casting shadows on their faces. Daniel felt his anger drain away, leaving only pain. He saw her tears, her sincerity, but fear still held him. He wanted to hug her, to tell her that he believed her, but Karen's words, her mockery, were still ringing in his ears. Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, her voice becoming quieter. Daniel, I love you. I have never betrayed you and never will. But if you don't believe me, if you think I still want Mark, then I don't know what to do next. He opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't find the words. His throat tightened, and he turned away, looking at the photograph on the table. Emily and Mark, so young, so carefree. He hated that photo, hated himself for allowing it to hurt him so deeply. Emily stepped towards the door, her voice barely audible. I am going to sleep. If you want to say, you know where to find me. But I can't. I can't do this anymore. She left, her steps fading on the stairs. Daniel was left alone, his hands shaking. He sat down on the sofa, dropping his head into his hands. The living room was silent, except for the ticking of the clock. He felt like their world was falling apart at the seams, and he didn't know how to hold it together. Emily's words, I love you, sounded in his head, but they fought against the poison of gossip, against his own fear. He wanted to believe her, but he didn't know if he could. And this uncertainty was the worst of all. Emily Harper sat in her car in the parking lot of Willow Creek Memorial Hospital, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. She was wearing a blue nurse's uniform, her brown hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, but there were shadows under her eyes from a sleepless night. The fight with Daniel in the living room, his accusations, his words that she still loved Mark, that he was just a backup option, still burned like an open wound. She barely slept, her thoughts swirling around his pain, his mistrust, and the source of this whole nightmare, the gossip he had heard in the hospital. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the trembling in her chest. She couldn't believe that Daniel, her Daniel, believed Karen Wilson and Lisa Thompson, two gossips who lived to delve into other people's lives. But his words, I heard them, Emily. They said you were flirting with him, confirming her worst suspicions. She remembered Karen and Lisa whispering in the break room, their sidelong glances, their quiet chuckles as she passed by. She had always tried to stay away from them, but now she realized they were the poison that poisoned her marriage. Today, she was going to find out the truth. She stepped out of the car, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The parking lot was almost empty, with only a few medical staff cars parked at the entrance. Emily adjusted her badge, her fingers touching the plastic with her name on it. Emily Harper, nurse. She was strong, always had been, but today that strength seemed fragile. She loved Daniel, she loved their daughter Sophie, they loved their life, and the thought that gossip could ruin it all made her furious. The hospital lobby smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee from the machine. Security guard Bob, as usual, was sitting at the counter, leafing through a sports magazine. He looked up, smiling. "Good morning, Emily," he said, his voice hoarse with age. "You're early today." "Hi, Bob," she replied, forcing herself to smile. "Shift is calling. Are Karen and Lisa here yet?" "Yeah, in orthopedics," he said, nodding towards the elevator. "Karen has been grumbling since the morning, as usual. Beware." "Thanks for the warning," Emily said, her voice firm, but inside she was seething. She stepped into the elevator, the doors clanging shut, and her stomach lurched. She knew Karen, a head nurse with a poisonous tongue who liked to feel superior to others. Lisa was softer, but played along with Karen so as not to be a target. Emily always tried to be professional, but now it was personal. The elevator opened on the third floor in the orthopedic department. The hallway was bright with fluorescent lights, and nurses and doctors scurried around with clipboards and folders. Emily walked past the front desk, where a young intern was typing something on the computer, and headed towards the break room. She knew that Karen and Lisa often gathered there before their shifts, drinking coffee and gossiping. The door to the break room was slightly open, and Emily heard familiar voices. Karen, as always, spoke louder, her tone full of smugness. Emily stopped at the door, her heart pounding. She didn't want to eavesdrop like Daniel, but she needed to know what they were talking about. She pressed herself against the wall, her breathing quiet. "I'm telling you, Lisa, she thinks she's so perfect," Karen said, her voice laced with venom. "Husband, child, everyone loves her. But I saw her with that guy in the cafe. She's not as saintly as she seems." Lisa chuckled, her voice nervous. "Well, maybe it wasn't what you think, Karen. Maybe they were just chatting." "Were you chatting?" Karen snorted. "Please." She beamed like a girl on a date, and her poor hubby is probably checking his homework at home. I feel sorry for him. Emily felt her blood boil. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. That was enough. She pushed the door open, entering the room with such force that it slammed against the wall. Karen and Lisa shuddered, their coffee mugs freezing in their hands. The room was small, with a worn sofa, a coffee machine, and a notice board littered with old notes. Karen, with her short blonde hair and piercing eyes, sat at the table. Lisa, younger, with a long braid, stood at the sink, her face red. "Emily," Karen said, her lips curling into a smirk, but her eyes flashing with wariness. "I didn't expect you so early." "Is it true?" Emily said, her voice as cold as steel. She stepped forward, her eyes burning. "And I expected you to wag your tongue, as always." "What did you say about me and Mark, Karen?" Karen raised an eyebrow, her grin widening. "Oh, so you heard? Well, I just told you what I saw. You and your old friend are in a cafe. Everyone is so happy. It's not my fault if the truth hurts." "Is it true?" Emily clenched her jaw. Her voice became louder. "Do you call your gossip the truth? I met Mark by chance for 5 minutes and told him to leave me alone. But you decided to make a big deal out of it too. What? To hurt me? My family?" Lisa cleared her throat, her fingers fiddling with her braid. "Emily, we didn't mean anything bad. Just chatting." "Were you chatting?" Emily turned to her, her eyes narrowed. "You laughed, Lisa, while Karen said that I was flirting with Mark. You know it's a lie, and now my husband thinks I'm cheating on him. Because of you. Karen leaned back in her chair, her smirk never fading. Oh, come on, Emily. Don't be dramatic. If your marriage is on the rocks, don't blame me. I just said what I saw. You're holding your nose up too high, that's all. It was time to put you in your place. Emily felt her face heat up. She stepped closer, her voice became quieter, but firmer. Put me in my place? What is this, Karen? Envy? Because I have a family that I love? Because I don't spend my life gossiping like you? You made up this lie to destroy my marriage, and you don't care who gets hurt. Karen laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. Envy. Please, you're not that special, Emily. Everyone knows your story, the pregnant girl who was picked up by Daniel. Maybe you're just remembering the old days with Mark. Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her skin. She wanted to hit Karen, but instead she took a deep breath, her voice turning icy. You don't know anything about me, Karen, and you don't know my family. But I'll tell you one thing, you've gone too far, and I won't let you destroy what I built. Lisa stepped forward, her face red with shame. Emily, I'm sorry, she muttered, her voice shaking. I didn't think it would go so far. Karen said she saw you and I just played along. But I know you're not like that. Sorry. Emily looked at Lisa. Her anger subsided slightly, but the pain remained. You should have known better, Lisa. You saw how I work, how I take care of my family, but you let Karen drag you into this. Karen huffed, crossing her arms. Oh, that's enough, Lisa. Don't be a ninny. It's Emily's own fault for running around cafes with her exes. If her husband doesn't like it, that's her problem. That's enough, Karen, Emily said, her voice like a whiplash. You lied. You exaggerated everything to hurt me, and I won't let you leave without consequences. I'll talk to the authorities. You've gone too far. Karen turned pale and her grin disappeared. Are you threatening me? Because I told the truth. It's not true, and you know it, Emily said, her eyes burning. And I'm tired of your games. Do you want to feel better by putting others down? This won't work with me. She turned to leave, but stopped when she looked at Lisa. And you, Lisa, think about who you want to be with. With her or with people who respect you. Emily walked out. Her steps were firm, but her hands were shaking. She walked down the hallway, ignoring the curious looks of the other nurses. In the locker room, she leaned against a locker, her breathing uneven. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not let them escape. She was strong, always had been, and now her strength was back. Karen and Lisa lied, and she proved it. But the pain that Daniel believed in them, and not her, still tore through her. She took out her phone, her fingers hovering over Daniel's number. She wanted to call and tell her what she found out, but she stopped. He blamed her and didn't trust her. She wasn't ready to talk, not yet. She needed time to gather her thoughts to figure out how to regain his trust. But now she knew the truth, and it gave her strength. Emily pocketed her phone and walked out into the hallway, ready for her shift. She was a nurse, a mother, a wife, and she won't let gossip ruin her life. Karen and Lisa would answer for their words, but the most important thing was to get Daniel back. She loved him, and despite the pain, she was ready to fight for their family. Emily Harper walked into the house, her nurse's uniform slightly damp from the rain, her brown hair stuck to her neck. Her shift at Willow Creek Memorial Hospital had ended an hour ago, but her thoughts were still swirling around her morning confrontation with Karen and Lisa, her co-workers whose gossip had nearly destroyed her marriage. She was exhausted, but the determination that had flared within her after exposing their lies burned brightly. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to talk to Daniel. Daniel sat in the living room, his dark hair disheveled, his flannel shirt unbuttoned at the top button. There was an empty bottle of beer on the coffee table in front of him, and the TV was showing a baseball game on mute. Their fight last night, his accusations that she still loved Mark, her tears, her leaving had left him devastated. He hated himself for what he said, for believing Karen's gossip, but the fear of losing Emily still held him in a vice. Emily stood in the doorway of the living room, her heart pounding. She looked at him, at his tired eyes, hunched shoulders, and felt a mixture of pain and love. "Daniel," she called quietly, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." He looked up, his face tense. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know where to start. Last night." "Wait," she interrupted, raising her hand. She stepped closer, sitting down on the sofa opposite him. Her green eyes sparkled, but she controlled herself. "I want to say it first. Please just listen." Daniel nodded, his hands clenching in his lap. He looked like a man ready to strike, but Emily did not want to strike. She wanted to heal. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her uniform. "Today I learned the truth," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "Karen and Lisa lied. They exaggerated my meeting with Mark to hurt me. Karen admitted that she wanted to put me in my place. Lisa apologized, but that doesn't matter. They lied, Daniel. I didn't flirt with Mark. I didn't shine with him. I told him that he was the past and that my life was you and Sophie. And it's true. I ran into them at the hospital. Karen grinned as if she was proud of it. She was jealous, Daniel. To my family, our life. She made up this story to sting me, and it worked. Because you believed her and not me." Daniel lowered his head, his face contorting. "Emily, I'm such an idiot. I shouldn't have." He trailed off, his throat tightening. "Wait," she said, her voice softening. "I haven't finished. I want you to know everything." She swallowed, her eyes filled with tears. "When I met you, I was broken. Pregnant, abandoned by Mark, rejected by her family. I felt worthless, like I didn't deserve anything good. But you didn't just save me, Daniel. You showed me that I am worthy of love. You gave me a home, a family, hope. I never looked back. I never wanted Mark. You are my life." Daniel looked at her, his eyes shining with tears. He wanted to say something, but she raised her hand to stop him. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to tell you earlier, before all these quarrels. I'm pregnant, Daniel. We finally succeeded. It's already been 2 months. I was going to make it a surprise, but then all this." She fell silent, her tears running down her cheeks. "I was so afraid that you didn't believe me, that you thought I didn't love you. But I love you, Daniel, more than anything else. And so that you don't doubt, we do a DNA test." Daniel gasped, his face turning pale. "Pregnant," he whispered, his voice breaking. He leaned forward, his hands shaking. "Emily, are you serious?" She nodded, her tears flowing freely. "Yes, I found out a couple of weeks ago. I wanted it to be special, but then you started moving away, and I didn't know how to say it." Daniel closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain and relief. He stood up, walking around the table, and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His cheeks were wet with tears. "Emily, forgive me," he said, his voice shaking. "I was such a fool." Emily sobbed, squeezing his hands. "Don't say that," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're everything to me, Daniel. But you have to believe me. I can't live knowing that you doubt me." "I believe," he said, his voice hoarse. "I believe you, Em. I was scared. I thought you might want something else, someone else. Sorry." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, their tears mingling. "I was afraid too," she admitted quietly. "Sometimes I feel unworthy of your love. You gave me so much, and I brought so much baggage. But I want to be honest, Daniel. Always." He hugged her. His arms were strong but gentle. "We will be honest," he promised. "No secrets. I love you, Emily, and our child, and Sophie. I won't let anything separate us." They sat for a long time, hugging in the silence of the living room, only the rain knocking on the windows. They talked all night, sorting out their fears, his insecurities, her guilt over the past, their shared pain from gossip. They promised to be open, to talk even when it's scary. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt their connection return, stronger than before. The following week, Daniel took matters into his own hands. He made an appointment with the head of the hospital, Dr. Richards, and spoke about Karen and Lisa's manipulations. He spoke calmly but firmly, explaining how their gossip had nearly destroyed his family. Dr. Richards, an older man with bushy eyebrows, listened carefully, his face serious. "This is unacceptable," he said, tapping his pen on the table. "We'll sort it out, Mr. Harper. This behavior undermines trust in the team." 2 days later, Karen received an official reprimand and was transferred to another department with a warning that another incident would lead to dismissal. Lisa, feeling guilty, came to see Emily in the orthopedics, her face red with shame. "Emily," she said, fiddling with the hem of her uniform, "I'm so guilty. I didn't think it would go this far. I... I was just playing along with Karen. Sorry." Emily looked at her. Her anger had subsided, but the pain remained. "I accept your apology, Lisa," she said, her voice level. "But you must understand the harm you have caused. Be careful in the future." Lisa nodded, her eyes full of tears, and left. Emily knew that Lisa wasn't evil, just weak, but forgiveness didn't come easy. The gossip in Willow Creek began to die down. When Daniel and Emily showed up at the school fair together, holding hands, their smiles were genuine. Sophie, running with Mia at the cotton candy stalls, noticed them and smiled, her relief obvious. She ran over, hugging them both. "You're normal again," she said, rolling her eyes, but her voice was full of joy. "Don't scare me anymore, okay?" Emily laughed, patting her on the head. "We promise, Sophie." A few months later, the Harper home was full of life. Emily, with a noticeably rounded belly, sat on the sofa, leafing through a catalog of cribs. Daniel came in from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of tea, his face soft, without the shadow that had darkened him in the spring. They were preparing for the birth of their second child, and their home became a refuge again. "How about this one?" Emily asked, showing him the page, with drawers below. "Practical." Daniel sat down next to him, looking at the picture. "Looks good, but I still vote for the one with the bear cubs." She chuckled, nudging him with her shoulder. "Bear cubs? Seriously. Sophie will say that this is for babies." "Sophie will say that everything we pick sucks," he said, grinning. "She's already a teenager, remember?" They laughed, their voices mingling in the warm comfort of the living room. The rain had long since stopped, and their lives were clear again. The gossip subsided, the pain went away, and their love, tested by fire, became stronger. They knew that there would be difficulties ahead, a new child, a life full of worries, but now they were together, honest and invincible. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.